Good afternoon to sir and my fellow friends. My name is Durka Devi anak perempuan Ratinasami with metric number 261518. Okay, today I'm going to present on topic introduction. Okay, first, the Marginalist School began in 1871 when Jevons and Menger published their influential books on marginal utility theory. Okay, then several forerunners predate them in the use of marginal analysis in economics. Okay. Also, the several second generation marginalists expand their stories further, such as Edgeworth and Clark. And then these could eventually become part of neoclassical economics or contemporary microeconomics. Okay, so our assignment will discuss about 5 major questions and contribution of Cournot, Jevons and Edgeworth in developing the ideas of that school. Okay, then now I'm going to discuss more on historical background of our assignment. Okay, serious economic and social problems remain unsolved even 100 years after the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. Okay, first, poverty was widespread, although productivity was increasing dramatically. Okay, we also can see uneven distribution of wealth and income created much dissatisfaction even though the general standard of living was rising. Okay, third, business fluctuation affected many people which individuals could no longer depend on their own initiative. Okay, then farmer and farm laborers had their difficulties and caused them to migrate into cities to find work. Okay, fifth, the long working hours, dangerous and unhealthy working conditions, the dominant power of employers in bargaining with workers, rise of monopolistic powers, caused people to find solution beyond classical economic thinking. Okay, the trend of 19th century in Europe was to develop three approaches to overcome social problems. First, to promote socialism, to bolster trade unionism, and third, to demand government intervention in the economy. However, the marginalists oppose all those three solutions and they support the classical school.
Good day, Doctor. I'm Angeline listening, metric number 261940. Now I will talk about major tenets of the Marginalist School. The basic idea of the Marginalist School are listed. The first one is focus on the margin. The school focus its attention on the point of change where discussions are made. In other words, on the margin. The marginalists attend to all economic theory, the marginal principle that Ricardo developed in his theory of land. The second one major tenet is rational economic behavior. The approach employed by the marginalists had its root in the word of Jeremy Bentham, in that they assured the dominant drive of human action is to seek utility and avoid disutility. The marginalists ensure that people act rationally in balancing marginal benefit (MB) and marginal cost (MC). Pressure and pain and its balancing present against future need. The third major tenet is microeconomy emphasized. The individual, person and firm take center in the marginalist drama instead of considering the aggregate economy or macroeconomics. The marginalists consider individual decision-making, market conditions for a single type of goods, the output of specific firm and so forth. The next one is the use of abstract deductive method. The marginalists reject the historical method. German historical school in the favor of the abstract and deductive approach pioneered by David Ricardo classical school. Ricardo began with the basic premise and then used logic to deduct generalization. His tendency is to use descriptive assumption to bolster his argument. This ceteris paribus approach, allowing one variable at a time to change while holding all other variables temporarily constant, enable the investigator to dissect complex phenomena one step at a time. The problem of the immensely complicated society with its countless variables was thereby simplified and penetrated in order and systematic manner. The next one in the poor competition emphasized. This is the work of small, individualistic, independent entrepreneurs, numerous buyers, many sellers, homogeneous product, uniform price, and no advertising. No person or firm have enough economic power to influence market price positively. Individuals can adapt their own action to demand, supply, and price through the interaction of thousands of people. The next one is demand-oriented price theory. For the early marginalist, demand become the primary focus in price determination. The classical economy emphasized supply as the significant determination of the price, but the marginalists swung the opposite extreme and emphasized demand as the significant determinant of price. And the neoclassical school emphasized both supply and demand as the significant determinant of price. The next major tenet is emphasis on subjective utility. According to the marginalist, demand depends on marginal utility, which is subjective psychological phenomena. Cost of production include the sacrifice and awesomeness of working, managing a business, and saving money to form a capital fund. The next major tenet is equilibrium approach. The marginalists believe that economic forces generally tend towards equilibrium, a balancing of opposing forces. Whenever disturbance causes dislocation, new movement toward equilibrium occurs. The next major tenet is merging of the land with capital goods. The marginalists lump land and capital resources together in their analysis and spot of interest, rents, and profit as being the return to property resources. This has its advantages ethically and also combat the conclusion though by some that land rent is unearned income and unnecessary payment in order to ensure the use of land. Marginalists generally couple the reward to the landowner with interest theory. The last major tenet is minimal government involvement. The marginalists continue the classical school defense of minimal government involvement in the economy as the most desirable policy. In most cases, no interference with natural economy law was in order if maximum social benefit were to realize. Now, I will talk about who did the marginalists benefit or seem to benefit from the generally is the humankind. Beneficial to all parties by providing a better understanding of how the free market system can allocate resources more efficiently and promote economic liberty. And for the specifically, the first one is workers, by showing that workers receive wages that are equal to their contribution. The second one is employers, by opposing union and by attributing unemployment to wages that were artificially high and inflexible downwards. The third is landowners, defends the landlord against attack based on Regadian rent theory. The fourth is wealthy people, by opposed to government intervention that might distribute income.
I'll start my presentation with how was the Marginalist School valid, useful, or correct in its time. The Marginalist School developed new and powerful tools of analysis, and thanks to these thinkers, economics became a more exact social science. Firstly, the conditions of demand are the important determinants for prices of both final goods and factors of production. And second, the marginalists explicitly stated the fundamental assumptions underlying economic analysis, unlike many of the classical economists that are leaving them lurking in the background. And number three, the partial equilibrium analysis. It is a condition of economic equilibrium which takes into consideration only a part of the market to attain equilibrium. It was very useful for extracting from the complexity of the real world, and this approach allowing ceteris paribus, which are one variable at a time, to change while other things held constant. Therefore, this method helps to simplify and analyze the problems and variables in an orderly and systematic manner. And lastly, the microeconomic approach. There is a certain advantages in not ignoring the individual economic unit or the small sectors of the economy. The microeconomic approach of marginalism have complemented the macroeconomic approach, which may overlook many problems by viewing the economy as a whole. So clearly, the microeconomic approach of marginalism has an important place in economic theory. Next, we proceed to which tenets of the Marginalist School become lasting contributions. Several tenets of the Marginalist School were subsequently challenged and some were even being rejected. For example, Keynes pointed to alleged fallacy of composition associated with marginalists and neoclassical employment theory. If one firm were to cut wages, it could expand its market by selling more goods at lower prices. Following that, the decline in purchasing power among its own employees will not affect it because they will normally buy only a small amount of its output. However, if all employers were to cut wages, they might find their market shrinking rather than expanding. Also, critics argue that the assumption of pure competition was a reasonable extraction looking backward from the 1870s, but it was too restrictive to be useful as competition declined after the 1870s. Hence, in today, pure competition can be found in only few sectors of the economy. Besides, the school failed to explain economic growth, and its theory have been proved to be inadequate for slowly developing countries. But despite this and other criticisms, many of the marginalist theories remain relatively unscathed, as the facts still can be found in contemporary textbooks on principles of economic and microeconomics. Next, we will identify which of the tenets of Marginalist School have become lasting contributions. The first one, mathematical economics, and number two, theory of duopoly. A duopoly is a type of oligopoly where two firms have dominant or exclusive control over a market, producing the same or similar goods and services. For example, the Apple and Android in mobile operating systems. And number three, basic monopoly model, which there is only one seller in an industry, selling a unique product in the market. And number four, theory of diminishing marginal utility, states that the additional utility gained from an increase in consumption will decreases with each subsequent increase in the level of consumption. And number five, theory of rational consumer choice for understanding the social and economic behavior. And lastly, the law of demand. And then we will proceed to the important economists in Marginalist School. And I will be focusing my part on Antoine Augustin Cournot, a French mathematician who published treatises on mathematics, philosophy, and economics. He was the first economist to develop concise mathematical models of pure monopoly, duopoly, and pure competition. Cournot is considered to be a forerunner to the Marginalist School because much of its analysis focused on the rates of change of total cost and revenue functions, which are now referred to as marginal cost and marginal revenue. And then I will be explaining on the Cournot's theory of monopoly. Cournot is credited with being the first economist to derive the now familiar proposition that a firm can maximize its profit by setting a price at which marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Suppose that a man finds himself proprietor of a mineral spring which possessed by no other. He could doubtless fix the price of a litre of this water at 100 francs, but he would soon see by the quantity demanded that this is not the way to make the most of his property. He would then successively reduce the price of the litre to the point which will have him the greatest possible profit, where the total revenue at maximum. Here, Cournot is assuming that the total cost and the marginal cost of obtaining the mineral water is zero, because this is the case that total profits will be maximized at that quantity of output where total revenue is the greatest. Using calculus, Cournot pointed out that this quantity is where the derivative of the total revenue function, which is marginal revenue, is equal to zero. We can see that from the graph here that the proprietor of the mineral water faces a downward sloping demand curve D, while the marginal revenue curve MR lies below the demand curve because lower prices apply to all liters of the mineral water, not just the extra one sold. It could be said that each additional unit sold will add its own prices to total revenue, but if that extra unit had not been offered for sale, the price received on the other liters would have been higher. The loss of this potential revenue must be subtracted from the gain in revenue received through the sale of the extra liter. Therefore, we can see that marginal revenue is less than the price at all, except the first unit of output, and the marginal revenue curve falls more rapidly than the demand curve. And now we come to graph B, where the points on the marginal revenue curve in graph A were shown by the TR curve in this graph. Based on graph B, we can see that the proprietor of the spring could charge 100 francs per liter, just as Cournot observed. However, at this high price, he would sell only 65 liters of mineral water. By dropping a vertical line downward from 65 liters from graph A to B, we can see that the proprietor's total revenue would be 6,500 francs. Due to the costs are zero, therefore the total profits would be 6,500 francs. But notice the graph A that marginal revenue is 80 at the 100 franc price. Clearly, the marginal revenue which are 80 have exceeded marginal costs which are zero. This is true for all units of mineral water up to the 200 liter. Therefore, instead of charging 100 francs per liter, the monopolist will use trial and error until the price settles at 60 francs. At 60 francs, the buyers will purchase 200 liters, and as shown in graph B, the total revenue will rise to 12,000 francs. This is the monopolist's maximum total revenue. Because total costs are assumed to be zero, so 12,000 francs is also the maximum profit. We can see that marginal revenue in graph A is zero at the profit maximizing price and output of 60 francs and 200 liters. Because the marginal costs are also zero, thereby the marginal revenue MR will equal to marginal cost MC. Therefore, here the profit maximizing condition is fulfilled. You could see that any price above or below 60 francs will reduce the total revenue and total profit. Cournot extended his theory to circumstances in which marginal costs are positive. The monopolist facing positive costs will also maximize profits when total revenue minus total cost, at that level of output where MR equals to MC. This rule also applies in situations where numerous competitors exist.
William Stanley Jevons, born in Liverpool, England, 1835 to 1882. Jevons studied chemistry and botany at University College London, UCL. Because of the bankruptcy of his father's business in 1847, Jevons left his study to take up a position of assayer at the mine in Sydney, Australia. He remained there for 5 years. He then resumed his studies at UCL on his return to England, published several books on logic and became professor of logic, political economy, and philosophy at Manchester and later at University College London. Invented a logic machine exhibit before the Royal Society in 1870. Formed as a historian of science and made outstanding contributions to development of index numbers. Jevons was extremely introverted and did not have great influence on his immediate peers or students. He died at the age of 47 because of drowning while swimming. Value theory. Jevons stated that value depends entirely upon utility. Labor determines value, but only in indirect manners, by varying the degree of utility of commodity through an increase or limitation of supply. Unlike Ricardo in classical school, who might say that pearls have value because people need to die for them, issue the cost of production. Jevons in the Marginalist School believed that pearls have value because buyers get utility from them. The specific level of utility associated with the pearls depends on the number of pearls people presently possess. To explain Jevons' value theory, we must therefore begin with his theory of the law of diminishing marginal utility. Then our attention will turn to his related nations of rational consumer behavior, individual and market exchange, and the optimal amount of work. There are four of Jevons on value theory, which is rational choice, the EQ marginal rule, theory of diminishing marginal utility, theory of exchange, and the last is Jevons on labor. Theory of diminishing marginal utility. Utility cannot be measured directly, at least with the tools at hand. Utility can be estimated only by observing human behavior and noting human preference. Jevons rejected any attempt to compare the intensity of pleasures and pains among different people. However, a single individual can compare utility of successive units of a single good and marginal utility of several goods. Law of diminishing marginal utility. The total utility TU that a consumer receives from each quantity of commodity X is shown in the upper graph. The lower graph shows the marginal utility MU, or the change in total utility as each unit of the commodity is added. Marginal utility, which is equivalent to Jevons' final degree of utility, declines as more of commodity X is consumed. The relationship between marginal utility and total utility. If the total utility increase, marginal utility in the positive. while the total utility in maximum, the marginal utility is 0. Moreover, the total utility will decline, the marginal utility in the negative. Jevons' law of diminishing marginal utility solves the paradox of diamond and water that puzzles some of the classic economists. Rational choice, the equimarginal rule. Jevons employed his notion of final utility (UM) to formalize a general theory of rational choice. Let's assume that there are two commodities which is X and Y, and the price of two commodities is the same regardless of use. According to Jevons, the consumer wishing to maximize utility will allocate money income in such a way that the marginal utility of the last dollar spent on all commodities is equal. Symbolically, this is stated as marginal utility X over price of X equals to marginal utility of Y over price of Y equals to marginal utility of N over price of N. If the ratio of the marginal utility of X to its price is greater than that for Y, then the rational consumer will purchase more of X and less of Y. When marginal utility of X over P price of X more than marginal utility of Y over price of Y, consumer will buy more of good X, marginal utility of X will decrease and marginal utility of X over price of X also will decrease. Consumer will continue to buy good X until marginal utility of X over Px equals to marginal utility of Y over price of Y is equal. If marginal utility of X over price of X less than marginal utility of Y over price of Y, consumer will buy more of good Y, and marginal utility of Y will decrease and marginal utility of Y over price of Y also will decrease. Consumer will continue to buy good Y until marginal utility of Y over price of Y equals to marginal utility of X over price of X. If these two are equals, we can say that consumer's total utility is maximized. Theory of exchange. Jevons used his principle of utility maximization to explain the gains from exchange. Assumption. There are only two trading body, which is A only has beef and B only has corn. Question 1. How the exchange of beef and corn will benefit A and B? Equimarginal rule. Because A has only beef. Marginal utility of beef over price of beef less than marginal utility of corn over price of corn. A will benefit by obtaining corn and giving up beef. Because B has only corn, marginal utility of corn over price of corn less than marginal utility of beef over price of beef. B will benefit by obtaining beef and giving up corn. Question 2. At what point will the exchange cease? The point at which there are no further possibility of utility gains from exchange, where marginal utility beef over price of beef is equals to marginal utility of corn over price of corn. For example, if the price of a pound of stick is 10 times greater than the price of a pound of corn, For example, $10 versus $1. Each person will consume both goods up to the point where the stick has 10 times the marginal utility of the pound of corn. For example, 100 versus 10 units of marginal utility. Restated algebraically, exchange will cease when the ratio of marginal utilities of the two goods as seen by each trading party matches the ratio of prices. For example, 100 over 10 equals to $10 over $1. Jevons on labor. Recall that Jevons held utility to be the determinant of exchange value. According to Jevons, cost of production determines supply, supply determines final degree of utility, and that one determines the value. Jevons, in refuting the labor theory of value in the classical school, argued that labor cannot be the regulator of value because labor itself has unequal value. It differs infinitely in quality of efficiency. Labor itself is a subjective psychological cause, a painful exertion. The problem of economics is to satisfy your wants with the least possible sum of labor. To accomplish this, the worker must compare the pain of work and the pleasure of earning. It's exact like the in the photo. The graph shows the pleasure and pain. MUE describes marginal utility of the earnings and MDUW is the marginal disutility of work. Above the line, OX measure pleasure utility and below line OX measure pain disutility. At point B and C on MDUW, neither pleasure nor pain. Beyond C, the pain of additional work is increased. At point M, where QM equals to DM, the pleasure gained from the earnings associated with the last units of work is exactly equal to the pain of the labor entered, which is MUE equals to MDUW. As a result, M equals to the optimal amount of work that worker can earn in a workday. Recapitulation of Jevons' thinking. Jevons believed that marginal utility is the determinant of exchange value. A change in exchange value may result from such factors as a change in people's relative preference for commodities. When exchange value changes, the value of the labor used to produce the commodity also changes. Changes in the value of labor in turn cause change in the optimum amount of work as viewed by workers in various industries. Therefore, asked Jevons, how can it be said that labor time is the cause of or even the measure of exchange value? Rather, the value of an hour of labor is determined by the final degree of utility of the product.
Hi everyone, my name is Alishana from Pankimano Green, matrix number 265018. Today I am going to present about Franz Y. Edgeworth, 1845 to 1926. He born in Ireland, 1845, and attended Trinity College in Dublin and studied in Oxford University. Later he became a professor of political economy at Oxford University, where he remains throughout his career. He also was one of the founders of Royal Economic Society, was editor to Economic Journal for 35 years. His contribution to economy are found in its mathematical cycles book, which was written in 1881, and numerous articles collected in 1925 under the title Papers Relating to the Politic Economics. One of the Edgeworth contribution to modern economy was its population of use of mathematics within the discipline. And Edgeworth's contribution to the content of economy thought was his original idea of indifferent curve, one of the first economy to discuss pricing behavior of oligopoly, and also explore the difference between average and marginal product. In his mathematics cycles book, Edgeworth introduced the curve of indifference, which he says that shows variance of combination of two items that will inherit an equal level of utility on the individual to an individual. Edgeworth used this graph to analyze an isolated exchange between two solo possessors of product. In this graph, Friday labeled as X2, Cruiser money as X1. Friday has used sum of Cruiser money, and Cruiser have used sum of Friday label. Okay, and then in different curve 1, 2 and 3 represent in Friday in different map. In different curve Roman 1, Roman 2, Roman 3 represent Cruiser in different map. Friday prefer indifferent curve beyond to the east. This is because curve 2 has a greater total utility to Friday than curve 1. Curve 3 has more than curve 2. Crews prefer indifferent curve beyond to the north. This is because curve Roman 2 has a greater total utility to crews than curve Roman 1. Curve Roman 3 has more than curve Roman 2. By overlaying crews in different map on Friday in different map, Edgeworth obtained a contract curve, which is called as tangent point of two sets of indifferent curves. We conclude that the price of Friday label in terms of cruise money are intermediate, that is a subject of bargaining. It will lie somewhere on the line A, B and C. Edgeworth says that at all the points of other than those on the line A, B, C, either in Friday or cruise can add to his utility without licensing the utility against by other party. This can be seen by noting point D on cruised indifferent curve 1, Roman 1, and Friday indifferent curve 1. Cruise can attend curve Roman 3 rather than curve Roman 1. At A, it is still leaving of Friday on its indifferent curve. Indifferent curve of Friday can achieve the argued utility associated with its indifferent curve 3 at point C without reducing cruises utility. Cruises remains on curve 1. In additional, self interest of two trades will push them to the contract curve. Friday could prefer C on this curve because it could placed him on indifferent curve. 3. Cruz could prefer A because it could provide him more utility than point B or C. This final contract between two trades in this case is interdeterminant. Any point of the contract curve is possible point of equilibrium, and the final outcome will occur through bargaining. This theory was reconstructed by Italian economics. Another significant idea by Edgeworth was difference between marginal product and average product. This graph shows the relationship between TP, MP and AP in a competition FEMA operation in the short run. This graph shows the horizontal as label, vertical as total product. In graph B, horizontal as label, vertical as average and marginal product. Underlying assumption was the variable resources label, which call as L, which known as L, and then the fixed resources capital known as K. This shows the diagram of short run production function. Graph B shows the MP and APs of label that corresponding with TP curve shows in curve A. MP is the change in TP associated with the change in label input L. It can be found by a tangent. AP can be found by drawing a straight line from the origin to an point on the TP curve, then finding the slope of line draw, which is tangent. This figure also shows that Edgeworth shows the difference between TP, MP and AP. When TP increase at the increased rate, MP also will increase, AP also will increase, but MP will be above AP. When TP increase at decreased rate, MP will decrease, AP will increase, so AP will be above MP. There the marginal return will occur. This theory are used in microeconomics. Thank you.
Now I'm going to discuss more on conclusion. Okay, first, the beginning of the Marginalist School is dated at 1871. So, William Stanley Jevons and Carl Menger published their influential books on marginal utility theory. Second, instead they re-emphasized the use of laissez-faire system pioneered by the classical school. They also opposed the socialist ideology and the government intervention in the economy. Third, this school sought to advance the interests of all humankind through promoting a better understanding of how a market system efficiently allocates resources and promotes economic liberty. Okay. Although the Marginalist School has its own weakness, many of their theories still can be found in contemporary textbooks, such as in the Microeconomics book and Principle of Economics. We can find the Theory of Monopoly and Duopoly by Cournot and Theory of Value by Jevons. Okay, marginal analysis applied to the whole body of microeconomics. Progress in mathematization of economics by all the contribution of the Jevons and Carl Menger. Okay, only input to the new era of economic thinking, such as neoclassical economics, produce a complete and consistent new microeconomics book. Okay, thank you.